Trying to work with
You
Sue to
go?
get her camera back on.
It's going, but it's not going to record me because I'm not showing up on there. Oh.
Yeah, I had a couple of messages that it was mute too.
Do you want to stay camera off?
No.
Thank you. It wouldn't be a convention without
This meeting is being recorded.
Sorry, it wouldn't be a convention without occasional technical difficulties, but we're back on track here. Again, for those of you who've heard our meeting before, I want to thank you all for joining us for this chance to remember and say goodbye to a giant of the field, Michael Diamond Resnick, who's been a friend and a mentor and an entertainer to this field for longer than some of us have been alive. I want to particularly thank NASFiC for providing this venue and this chance for all of us friends of Mike to come together. Particularly, I wanted to thank Ann Gray and Hafitha Akwi from programming, Rob Stewart from the opening ceremonies, Matt Arnold and Alan Bond, and the entire tech support team for putting this together. I want to thank Shahid Mahmood and John Goodwin for helping to organize and put this together. Very much want to thank Laura and Carol Resnick for helping us to put together memories of theirs, and Laura for joining us tonight. And I'm Martin L. Shoemaker. I'm assistant editor at Galaxy's Edge. So I'm very honored to be here in a sad circumstance, but a circumstance where I'm glad to at least be able to share it all with all of you. It's a little bit of an odd situation. When we lost Mike in January, my first thought was, I'll be able to get together with his friends and his family and his community because NASFiC is in Ohio this year. So it's right in his territory. And then of course we know what happened to this year. And so we can't get together, we can't hug, but thanks to NASFiC, we are able to have this opportunity to get together and share our memories and our appreciation for everyone who stood by Mike in the final year through his medical difficulties, the people who helped him keep going because the man was working right up till practically the end, the people in his family who stood by and watched him go. This is our chance to remember and pay tribute to a man who touched so many of us. And I personally am glad to be here because Mike had a big impact on my career, but I only knew him for a handful of years. The people you're going to hear from tonight have known him for decades. I'm looking forward to hearing their Mike stories to add to the little bit that I know. So we're going to start with Laura Resnick with a little bit of information on the dad she knew that all the rest of us only knew from the outside. Then we'll hear from John Goodwin with a biography of Mike. And then we're going to hear from a number of panelists who are going to each share some of their memories of Mike. We will have a break in the middle at about the half-hour point, and we'll see then a photo and video montage of some pictures of Mike and the family and friends through the years. Then we'll come back for some more memories. During that break, you may want to find a glass of something to raise in a toast, because we're going to finish the memories with a toast to Mike. Then we're going to try, I'm not entirely sure how the technology on this is going to work, but I trust that our tech team is going to help us work this out. We're going to try to be able to look at some of your memories from the community through the Discord chat, try to share some of that. We'll finish up with Leslie Robin, the editor at Galaxy's Edge, with a closing to remember Mike, remember the family, and remember his impact on this community. So that's how we're going to try to run things tonight. This is not the sort of event that any of us have a lot of practice with, so If the schedule gets a little bumpy, please bear with us. We would like to start with Laura Resnick, Mike's daughter and a writer in her own right, with a reading based partly on what's in the program book. Please, Laura.
Thank you, Martin. Can everyone see me? All right, well, good evening, everyone. My mom and I thank all of you for joining us in this virtual gathering to remember my father, Mike Resnick. I particularly want to thank Martin and also John Goodwin, who've done so much to plan and prepare this service. And also I want to thank the hardworking members of the NASFiC committee. Also want to thank Shahid Mahmoud and Leslie Robin, who were such a help and comfort to my mom in the difficult weeks after my father died. Mom and I discussed it months ago and decided that a science fiction convention would be the most fitting place to have Pop's memorial. This was his world, his family, and he loved it so much. We know it's what he would have wanted. My father died on January 9th, after nearly a year of constantly being in and out of the hospital. He chose to keep the severity of his illness private, very private, mostly because he was so sure right up until the end that he'd recover and live for years. I respected his wishes, but I knew this meant that a lot of people who would have liked to say goodbye did not get to do so. So this gathering is for them and for you. And you're going to hear some of his friends and colleagues tonight talk about my father as a writer, an editor, a mentor, an icon, and a friend. But to me, he was just, well, my dad. My dad thought the Andrews Sisters performed the last good pop music ever recorded. My dad loved dogs, hated vegetables, and was ambivalent about cats. I volunteer in cat rescue, and the question he asked every time he saw me was, how many cats are in your house right now? My dad was severely colorblind. He could play the piano by ear. He was so incompetent in the kitchen, he could barely make a peanut butter sandwich by himself. That's true. Peanut butter was his favorite food. For decades, Pop wrote all night and then slept past noon every day. Most of my school friends remember Dad as the scary dad because he was gruff and scowly. But when a close friend of mine from those days was going through a very tough time while I was out of the country and unavailable even by telephone for months, my dad spoke with her on the phone at length multiple times. My dad was completely devoted to my mom, and he wanted his cremated ashes to be mingled with hers someday, which I will eventually do. My dad had a happy life. He achieved most of his goals and dreams. And shortly before he died, my mother told him that no one could have had a better husband. And I knew in mid-December that my dad wasn't going to make it, because that's when he asked me to finish writing his final novel for him, the third book of an urban fantasy trilogy. He had always wanted to collaborate with me. This was a perpetual refrain for years. He co-authored many stories and books with other writers, and he kept asking me to collaborate with him. I always refused, because co-writing anything with my dad would be bad for family harmony and my sanity. Years ago, I did agree to write the introduction to a collection of his co-authored short stories. And as soon as I said yes, he started telling me exactly what he wanted me to write. And I said, this is why I will never collaborate with you. This, right here, this. But in response to my father's dying request, I agreed to finish writing his final book, Lord of Nightmares. He left the book about half done, and for the remainder of the novel, there's a set of notes which, of course, tell me exactly what to write. So cheers, old man, you got your way. What I've learned about death over the years is that even after they're gone in the flesh, your loved ones always remain with you in spirit. And so I know my father is here with me right now, looking over my shoulder. And he's telling me I've talked long enough. He wants to hear from his friends now, from all the people he did not get to say goodbye to. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Next, with a biography of Mike Resnick, as if anyone could do a just biography without spending the rest of the weekend. But joining us for this will be John Goodwin, president of Galaxy Press. He's been involved with book publishing since 1986 and currently hosts the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. Please turn over to John.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for joining and celebrating the life of Mike Resnick, author, editor, mentor, husband, and father, not just to Laura, but to dozens and dozens of his writer children. Michael Diamond Resnick was born March 5th, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois. He attended the University of Chicago from 1959 to 1961, won 3 letters on the fencing team, majored in absenteeism, and met his wife, Carol Kane Resnick. They were married when he was 19 years old. He remained very devoted to her for the rest of his life. They were married for 58 years, with Carol as his partner in all things. His daughter, Laura, born in 1962, brought up the fact that as she was growing up, Mike would sometimes bring out the foils and masks and teach her a few fencing moves, or practice with house guests who fenced a little. He worked as a file clerk in Chicago until 1965, then began to focus on writing and editing. In the 60s and 70s, he edited men's magazines and tabloid newspapers. In 1968, Mike and Carol became serious breeders and exhibitors of collies, a pursuit they continued through 1981. During that time, they bred and/or exhibited 27 champion collies and were the country's leading breeders and exhibitors during various years along the way. This led them to purchase the Briarwood Pet Motel in Cincinnati in 1976. It was the country's second largest luxury boarding and grooming establishment, and they worked full-time at it for the next few years. By 1980, the kennel had made them financially independent. It was being run by a staff of 21, and Mike was free to return to his first love, science fiction, albeit at a far slower pace than his previous writing. He was an only child and very close to his father, who died in 2001. His mother died about 20 years before that. When his father was dying, Mike, as the ever optimist, would sometimes call Laura and say, "He sounded good today. I think he's getting better." His father was in his late 80s and definitely not getting better, but Mike just wanted his dad back so much, so Laura never contradicted him. He was very interested in the wildlife, geography, cultures, and history of Africa, traveled there several times, and some of his books and stories influenced by that background included Ivory, Kirinyaga, A Hunger in the Soul, and Bibi. He was a lifelong fan of science fiction and fantasy and a collector of almost everything from Edgar Rice Burroughs books and old pulp magazines to Worldcon program books and fanzines, theater playbills, comics, and chess sets. His knowledge of SF and Spanish history was almost encyclopedic, and he loved fandom and conventions. Mike Resnick was a prolific and acclaimed science fiction author, nominated 27 times for Hugo Awards and winning 5. Kirinyaga in 1988, The Manamuki in 1990, 7 Views of Olduvai Gorge in 1994, The 43 Antarian Dynasties in 1997, and Travels with My Cats in 2004. He was a finalist for 11 Nebula Awards, winning 1 for 7 Views of Olduvai Gorge. In 1995, he received the Skylark Award for imaginative fiction with a lifetime achievement in science fiction. Mike began editing anthologies with Alternate Presidents in 1992, producing many books in collaboration with Martin H. Greenberg, including SF mystery anthologies, Whatdunnits in 1992, and More Whatdunnits in 1993. He co-edited 2 feature Earth anthologies with Gardner Dozois, both in 1993. Other notable anthologies include Stars, original stories based on the songs of Janis Ian in 2003 with Janis Ian, New Voices in Science Fiction in 2003, Worldcon Guest of Honor Speeches in 2006 with Joseph Clary, and Red Tide in 2014. He edited fiction for Jim Bain's Universe from 2007 to 2010 and began editing Galaxy's Edge magazine in 2013, with the best stories from the latter collected in 2 volumes, Best of Galaxy's Edge 2013 to 2014, and the Best of Galaxy's Edge 2015 to 2017. His work was the subject of Fiona Kelligan's Mike Resnick, an annotated bibliography and guide to his work in 2000. In all, he produced over 70 novels, more than 25 collections, hundreds of stories and articles, and edited over 40 anthologies. As a strong supporter of the Writers of the Future contest, Mike became a judge in 2010. He received the L. Ron Hubbard Lifetime Achievement Award for contributions to the arts in 2017. Mike judged contest entries through the 4th quarter of 2019. He was diagnosed with aggressive lymphoma in November 2019, and his health declined sharply near the end of that year. In early January, doctors discontinued treatment. Mike is survived by his wife and their daughter, author Laura Resnick. Mike lives on through his writings and the memories of those who love him. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And now we'd like to turn to some of those memories, Mike's friends who've joined us here, just a few of the thousands of friends he had in this community, the few that were available as part of NASFiC and really said, I need to talk about Mike. And so we're going to start our memory section with Leslie Robin. She is the assistant publisher of Arc Manor and the editor of Galaxy's Edge magazine. She collaborated with Mike on 5 short stories, all of which were award-nominated stories. Leslie.
Hello. I have to say I had the pleasure of knowing Mike for more than a decade. It seems like it wasn't enough time. I do have to say that. But he made such an impact on my life. When I met him, I wasn't a writer. It was actually Mike that showed me that I could be a writer. And as Laura mentioned earlier, he can be quite tenacious when he he wants something. He really wanted to collaborate with his daughter. He told me so many times how much he wanted to collaborate with Laura. But when it comes to me, he thought that I had what it takes, and I was stubborn, and I had said, no, I'm fine. I don't know if I can do it, and I don't want to waste your time. Well, what did he do? He didn't give up. This is very Mike. He invited me to Worldcon. It was Denvention in 2008. And he said, why don't you just then come and meet your favorite authors? I can introduce you. He did not mention writing because, we'd settled that argument, obviously. And so I turn up at the convention, and he not only introduced me to all of his friends, all of his peers, he also made sure that I was able to meet my favorite authors and my twin sister's favorite authors so I could get signed books. But this is where little sneaky Mike came in. He organized for all these authors to give me novels, signed novels. I had them turning up at my hotel room. I had them handed to me when I met people. I would walk into a party and he would introduce me, and I would get handed a signed book. He also had an autograph book that people were signing. And when I was too shy, he would just grab it and say, can you please sign this for Leslie? And what happened at the end of that weekend, other than the fact that I had an amazing time, he also invited me to the Hugo Awards to see what it's like to be nominated for an award. but he basically sat with me at the end of the conference and said, so this is your family. This is where you belong. You are a writer. You just haven't written yet. And that was the start of my career. He basically showed me that everyone in this field will welcome a newcomer without hesitation, and also showed me that I could be one of you. I could become a writer. And so after that conference, I agreed to write my first story with him. And I would like to also mention his thoughtfulness. He knew I was legally blind, no one else did at the time. And he'd made sure that he'd organized a female roommate for me that could be there when he couldn't, because, he was at the convention for work. And so I've never forgotten, one, that act of kindness on his behalf and his real belief in new writers, but also the fact that he literally showed me what my truth path was. And here I am now, writing and editing and working for the wonderful Shahed. And I couldn't thank him anymore for that. His friendship as my mentor became akin to like a father to me. He literally became my family. And as we all know in this community, the authors, fans, readers, we all become a family. And I can't thank Mike enough for that. So thank you. Off to you, Martin.
Thank you, Leslie. Next up will be Nancy Kress. She's been writing science fiction for 4 decades and has won 6 Nebulas, 2 Hugo Awards, and the Sturgeon Award for her fiction. Nancy?
Thank you, Martin. I met Mike sometime in the 1980s. I don't remember the date, but I remember the occasion, because occasions with Mike were memorable. We were playing pool at some small convention in upstate New York, and we had our very first argument. I said that I had won 1 game and he had won 1 game, and he said, no, he won both of them. This argument kept both of us amused for decades. What I discovered about Mike is that you could argue with him. There are friends you cannot argue with, you can only agree, and there are friends that you can feel free to argue with. So we argued all the time about everything. We argued about small things. John mentioned that Mike had raised dogs. I said I was interested in a dog. He said I needed a collie. I said I didn't want a collie. A collie was too big. A collie was not what I had. He said, yes, you want a collie. And then he spent at least 10 minutes explaining why I wanted a collie. I ended up getting a toy poodle. But we argued about more substantial things too. One of the things we argued about was writing. Mike maintained for a long time that you could not teach writing, that a person either was a writer and taught themselves, or they weren't. And I said, no, I think you can teach writing. You should try Clarion, teach Clarion. I think it'll change your mind. No, it won't, he said. You can't teach writing. You can only learn it by yourself. Well, eventually he was asked to teach Clarion. And when he had finished his week, he called me up and he said, okay, you were right. I was astonished at how much those students improved from the first week of Clarion until the end of Clarion. I wouldn't have thought it was true, but you were right. And I said, aha, because Mike almost never admitted that I was right. We argued on panels. We argued on the Sail to Success teaching cruises that Shahed Mahmood organized for several years, and we were both instructors on. We argued at our annual breakfast at the Writers of the Future, where we were both judges. We argued occasionally in letters, and we had one epic argument on our only collaboration. It was, frankly, a disaster, and this was not Mike's fault. We had a story idea, and obviously Mike could collaborate because he collaborated with scores of people over the years. It turns out that I'm not much of a team player. I wanted control of the material. Mike wanted control of the material. We finally produced a story, but it was not a very good story, and we kind of tacitly agreed to never mention it again, which we never did. So we went on arguing, and we went on enjoying each other's company, and that included Carol as well, because Mike was not a morning person. When we were on the Sail to Success cruises, he always asked for the evening panels. Carol and I, on the other hand, wanted in the evening to go to the cabaret and the Broadway shows and the other things that you can get on a cruise. So we did that, and we left Mike to go on and on about the business of writing, at which he was superb, on various panels, while Carol and I would go off and watch the can-can dancers and related things. So it was really the kind of a friendship that you don't get a lot of. And I miss him a lot. And I know that I will go on missing him.
Thank you, Nancy. Next up, we have Beth Meacham, an executive editor at Tor Books. She edited Mike in the 80s and early 90s. Beth.
First, okay, there I am. First, I want to say to Carol and Tamara, my ongoing condolences. You know better than anyone how much fun I had working with Mike over the years, but your loss is so much greater than ours. Starting in 1985, I began working with Mike as his editor at Tor. We did 8 books together, starting with Santiago. It was the most interesting editorial relationship I ever had, because while I was editing Mike, he kept trying to turn me into a writer. He succeeded to some extent. I wrote a half dozen short stories for him, and even sold some of them elsewhere, not just to him. I knew, though, that I would never really cross to that side of the desk, and I'm pretty sure that Mike did too. I kept trying to turn him into a horseman. Mike loved horse racing, but he didn't care one little bit about the horses. I love horses, but I hate horse racing. At least the high-stakes world of 2- and 3-year-old racing. And we'd argue about it, and argue, and argue. He'd tell me about statistics and betting and dosing, and how complex and interesting it was. And I'd tell him about how great riding and training actual grown-up horses was, and how the racing game was breaking down babies. I completely failed to change his mind. He loved animals, mind you. Just look at his dogs. I enjoyed every minute of working with him. He was a pro. He was aware of everyone who works for a publishing company, and he made their lives easier. And I'll always laugh at the way he would write outrageous joke posts about me on Genie. Some of you may remember the adventures of editor Meacham. But he always called me boss to my face. Rest in peace, Juana. We'll miss you.
Thank you, Beth. Next up, we have Stephen H. Silver. When Stephen attended his first convention in 1986, he met Mike. Over the years, they became friends and colleagues, with Stephen publishing 3 of Mike's books and some articles and fanzines, and Mike publishing one of Stephen's stories. Stephen?
A few months ago, I was talking to somebody about people who have an influence on your life, and they don't realize it, and how important it is for us to let them know that. Since that time, I've spoken to one friend's widow to let her know that her husband helped inspire my first novel that was just published. That was not Carol. I also thanked another friend's widow for inviting me to that first convention in 1986. And again, that wasn't Carol. And in some ways, I don't have to thank Carol because I had the chance to thank Mike for everything he's done for me over the years. I'm on the board of directors for NASFiC, which runs WindyCon in Chicago, which was that first convention I went to. Mike was one of the founding board members. Without Mike, I wouldn't have found WindyCon and possibly not found fandom. To a large extent, him being involved in that convention caused me to be where I am. We met in '86, and over the years, I went from being a reader and a fan to becoming a friend of Mike's, which is a great experience. In around 2000, I found myself out of work shortly before WindyCon, and Mike knew this and introduced me to an old high school friend of his who helped me get a job that I worked at for the next 8 years. Mike's publishing of the various alternate presidents, alternate outlaws, and so forth in the mid-90s inspired me in part to create the Sidewise Award for Alternate History. Mike was publishing so much of it, there had to be enough out there that we could find some good stuff and give it awards. I'm still working on the Sidewise Awards. So again, Mike helped inspire a major part of my life there. I live in the northern suburbs of Chicago, where Mike grew up. About 10 minutes away from my house is one of the houses that Mike lived in, and I drive by it all the time. And every time I do, I think of Mike. I think of the dogs that he raised. I think of the science fiction that he wrote. I think of the help and support that he's given me over the years. I was honored to be able to publish him in my fanzine. I was honored to be able to publish 3 books of his, one of which the cover, you can see part of it behind me. And eventually, I was honored that Mike contacted me and said those words that every author wants to hear: I'm going to buy your story. One of the high points of WindyCon for me every year was the Thursday night banquet, when I got to sit with Mike and Carol and talk about whatever. It didn't matter. It was helping to build the friendship that I had with them. So although I don't have to tell Carol and I don't have to tell Laura what Mike meant to me because I had the chance to tell Mike, this is my chance to let Laura and Carol know how much of an impact Mike had on my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. All right. At this point, assuming the tech support team's in sync with where I'm at, we have a montage of photos of Mike and also a video clip that we would like to play as an intermission, a chance for people to also go out and find a glass of something to raise in a toast, because after we have some more memories, we'll be saying a toast to Mike. And so, tech team, if you're ready, I'd like to turn over to you into the video. Does that sound good? Is the video playing in Discord maybe?
Because their purpose is to show. Hey, Alan, are you there?
The recording has stopped.
We are trying to raise our video streamer fellow.
So I'm not sure where the video is because I didn't see it. I haven't seen it, so I didn't load it up. I have Cat Rambo's video, but I haven't seen this one.
Presentation later when we can do the video as well. And we can go on a back channel and I can send you the link for that, or John, if you could send them a link for that, post it in the chat maybe. In the meantime, let us return to our memories. Let's take a small break and again, get your chance to get a drink to raise and a toast. And we'll be back here in 5 minutes. Thank you. That
This
we now
meeting
have
is
found our
being
video,
recorded.
and we would like to actually at this point share the video montage with you. This was assembled by John Goodwin with help from Laura and Carol and from other friends in the community. So this is a little bit of memories of Mike in video form.
This meeting is being recorded.
And we would like to actually at this point share the video montage.
You got to accentuate the positive feeling, minus the negative, latch on to the affirmative, don't mess with Mr. In Between. You got to spread joy up to the maximum, bring gloom down to the minimum, have faith or pandemonium, liable to walk upon the scene.
To illustrate his last remark, Jonah in the whale, Noah in the ark. What did they do just when everything looked so dark?
Man, they said we better accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, latch on to the affirmative, don't mess with Mr. In Between. No, do not mess with Mr. In Between. Do you hear me?
Oh, listen to me, chillin', Anna. You will hear about the eliminating of the negative and an accent on a positive.
Gather round me, children, if you're willing, and sit tight while I start reviewing the attitude of doing right.
You gotta accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, latch on to the affirmative, don't mess with Mr. In Between.
You got to spread joy
Up to the maximum,
bring gloom
down
to the minimum.
then
Otherwise, pandemonium, liable to walk upon the scene.
To illustrate,
Well, illustrate.
my last remark,
You got the flaw. Jonah in the whale, Noah in the ark.
what did they say?
What did they say?
Say when everything looks so dark. Man, they said we better accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, latch on to the affirmative, don't mess with Mr. In Between. No, don't mess with Mr. In Between. Holding hands at midnight, neath the starry sky. Nice work if you can get it, and you can get it if you try. Strolling with the one voice, sighing sigh after sigh. Nice work if you can get it, and you can get it if you try. Just imagine someone waiting at the cottage door, with two hearts to come one. Who could ask for anything more? Loving one who loves you, and then taking that vow. Nice work if you can get it, and if you get it home, won't you tell me how I'm holding hands at midnight beneath the starry sky? Oh my, oh my, oh my, I feel like perfect dough. Goes on thinking of the one I love. I don't know and I don't care. I feel as though floating on air, floating through skies above clouds, thinking of the one that I love. Just imagine someone waiting at the cottage door.
Please welcome Riders of the Future Judge Mike Resnick and Ms. Jane Pettyjohn.
Stop the crawl for just a minute. Why should Eric be the only one to ad-lib? It's a given in this and every other field that when you've had a successful career, you pay back. But in this field, it's almost impossible because by the time you've been a remarkable success, everybody who helped you is either rich or dead or both. So you pay forward. And the many judges and workshoppers who run and work the contest do much the same thing. And it's reached down into the actual field itself. My own example is that I have been editing a science fiction magazine for the past 6 years. I don't know who I buy from until after the contracts go out and I hear from them, but it turns out that more than half the stories I've bought have been from Writers of the Future graduates.
Let me see the world with clouds. Take me to the world. Out where I can push through crowds. Take me to the world. A world that smiles with streets instead of aisles. Where I can walk for miles with you. Take me to the world that's real. Show me how it's done. Teach me how to laugh, to feel. Move me to the sun. Just hold.
Thank you, John Goodwin, for putting together that presentation, the video montage. Thank you, Laura and Carol, and everyone who contributed the wonderful photographic memories of Mike. That was very moving. Here in our second half, we've decided we want to change things up a little bit, make it a little bit more of a community than just a sequence of discussions. So I want to bring on the rest of our presenters for memories, introduce all of them, have them take turns talking back and forth, and then the rest of the presenters, if there's anything you want to pitch in as well, let's get them a chance to get sort of started first. But then from there, let's open it up and share memories of Mike back and forth. So let me do some introductions here quickly. Joining us will be Eric Flint. Mike and Eric co-edited Jim Bain's Universe magazine. We're both judges in the Writers of the Future contest and co-authored a novel, The Gods of Sagittarius. Also joining us is Sue Francis, the fan guest of honor this weekend, along with her husband, Steve. She contributed greatly to the long-running success of RiverCon in Louisville, Kentucky. Also joining us, Brad R. Torgerson is multi-award winning writer and Mike's writer's son. Kat Rambo will not be joining us. She had a conflict. She does have a video recording. We'll try to find some time here in the schedule where we can play her memories that she recorded. She's a writer and former SIFWA president who collaborated with Mike on the short story, The Mermaid Club. Joseph Clary will be joining us. He's a SMOF and a fan historian, founder of fanact.org. He co-edited the WorldCon Guest of Honor Speeches volume with Mike in 2006 and received the Big Heart Award in 2016 along with his wife, Edie Stern. And last among the new presenters, Shahed Mahmood set up a small publishing company in 2006 and worked with Mike on a number of projects, including the Stellar Guild books, the Sail to Success Writers Workshops, and the Galaxy's Edge magazine that Mike just mentioned in that video clip. So I'd like to turn things over to you folks, Eric and Susan, and Sue, I'm sorry, and Brad and Joe and Shahid, and then as the rest of you feel inspired, join into the conversation.
Thanks, Martin. This is Brad. I guess I'll go first. Leslie's comments mirror mine. I'd never met Mike in my life until I stepped up on the stage in California for Writers of the Future back in 2010. It's hard to believe it's been 10 years. And at that time, Mike didn't know me from Adam, but unbeknownst to either one of us, we would eventually strike up a very, very, what I would describe as definitely a father-son friendship. Mike tended to pick you, was my experience. If you had even a little bit of talent and you seemed like you were going places, he would grab onto you and he doted on you. And he certainly invested a great deal of time and effort and energy in me. I can't calculate the ways that he's had a positive impact on not only my writing, but also the trajectory of my writing career, and also just as a person. For whatever reasons, I don't know, it seemed like Mike and I just clicked. Now, frequently for Writers of the Future winners, when you go down to California, you know, John and Joni and everybody, they're wonderful. They get you in the mix with all of the judges, and they're these big time people, and there you are as a brand new winner, and it can be very, very intimidating. But Mike was never intimidating. Not once do I ever remember feeling ill at ease in his presence. He was very disarming. He was very charming. He had a little bit of a rascal's twinkle in his eye, which I thought was great. And he would spin amazing stories about the field going back decades. He seemingly knew everybody who could possibly be anybody. And all you had to do was ask, and he would talk the night away. And it was a delightful experience for me as a new author way back when. And eventually it got to be, again, like I said, a very genuine father-son kind of relationship, to include, you know, Mike hosted me. Carol and Mike were very generous to host me for about a week back in 2012 when I was a Hugo nominee. And Mike was always the kind of guy you wanted to make proud of you. That was the other thing about the father-son relationship that, at least in my experience, was very true. I was always very proud to do him right by winning an award or a new book coming out, anything like that. He would always pop in and celebrate. Even if we didn't get a chance to see each other, I was very distraught that I never had a chance to shake his hand again. You know, of course, he had the illnesses and I was away on military deployment, and we just never were able to cross paths like we did for those few years in California at Writers of the Future. But he still took the time to come and make his presence known. And I was always very proud to say, look, you know, writer dad, I did it. I did something, you know, I achieved something. And he would applaud, and he would send nice notes, and he would tell you, this is wonderful. Okay, keep going, kid, keep doing it. And I just found that to be so heartwarming and very delightful. He had endless enthusiasm for all the new writers. Everybody who took under his wing, didn't matter where you were from, male, female. Again, if you had just even a little bit of talent, and he thought, hey, you're somebody I want to put some time and energy into, he would, and he would do it unflinchingly, and he would do it with no reservation whatsoever. And it was extremely gratifying, and I'm very thankful for who he was. And like I've told many people online and at different conventions I've been to, I like to think that even though Mike isn't physically here with us, I like to think that his spirit walks tall in the cosmos. Thank you, Writer Dad. We love you and miss you.
I suppose I could go next if that's okay then, if you're not going in order. This is Shahid. I run a small press, and as a small publisher, we do a lot of reprints. And back in 2010, we had landed a contract for some of Daniel Galoui's book. And I asked Eleanor Wood of Spectrum if she knew someone who might be interested in writing an afterword to one of the books. And she asked me if I knew of an author named Mike Resnick, who was a huge fan of Daniel Galoui's. Well, having read the Santiago books and the Widowmaker series and a bunch of others he had written while I was growing up, I was very familiar with Mike, and quite frankly felt delighted that I might actually get to work with him. Keep in mind, I grew up in Pakistan, where it was difficult to get SF books, let alone imagine one could one day be meeting one of those authors, let alone getting to work with one of them. And little did I know that that was the start of a great friendship and so many projects that he and I would work together on. I'm sure most of you have heard of Mike's writer children. Brad mentioned like he considered himself one of his writer sons, and how he mentored a whole generation of new writers. I think the same mentoring instinct kicked in when he met me, because I was a naive newbie publisher. My background's not in publishing. I was a finance guy. This was like a midlife crisis for me. I gave that all up and set up a publishing company, and I was stumbling along in the publishing world. And for some reason, he just decided he needed to help me. And I shamelessly took all that he could give, and he generously gave all that he could. And I think, and I'm sure, I don't think I know, I am where I am right now, largely because of him. And when he was the guest of honor at ShackCon in 2012, he decided I need to meet all the right people. So he decided to have me go along to every Worldcon function that he was invited to. And when I asked him if that was okay, he just laughed and said, well, I'm the guest of honor. What do you think they're going to do, kick me out of the con? And so I tagged along. He did get me into trouble though, because, and with Bob Silverberg of all people, remember I was new to the whole thing, not really sure of how all these things worked out. And he asked me to come along with him to the Hugo nominees get together. And I asked him what was the dress code, and he said, well, I'm just going the way I am. He was casually dressed like he usually was at cons, and you should be fine in what you are too. So there I showed up, and he and I were the only ones in a totally casual outfit. And I remember the immaculately dressed Bob Silverberg having some choice words for me on how I was dressed, and also that I had depended on Mike's advice on how to dress for the occasion. I could go on for hours with stories of Mike and how helped me, but time is short. And we did so many things, like I said, together. But I would like to close with a story about Galaxy's Edge, which really, I think, reflects what Mike was all about. In 2030, I thought it would be nice to create a magazine. I'm not an editor, so I needed one. My budget was very limited, and I knew I could not really afford a well-known editor, but I also knew that Mike knew everybody in this industry. So I went with him with the idea and asked him if he knew of someone who would be willing to do the work, well, cheaply, something that I could afford. Now, Mike had long lamented the decline of paying venues for short fiction in this field, and one of the things he really wanted to do was mentor new talent. So he listened to me, and he surprised me by saying that he would create and edit the magazine for me. He had two conditions: that he could fill half the magazine at least with unknown writers that he chose, and that I would pay them pro rates and pay them in a timely fashion. When I agreed to his terms, he then asked, by the way, what are you paying the editor? Which was going to be him now, obviously. And I said my budget was $200 per issue. And he just looked at me and laughed, and then went on to single-handedly create Galaxy's Edge magazine for $200 an issue, just so that new writers had a new professional venue to get their stories published. That was Mike Resnick, and I really do miss him. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Joe Siclari. I am a fan. I haven't worked with Mike really professionally, but I have known him since the 1970s. We hung out a lot at conventions. We were both interested in the history of the field, and that's pretty much how we kept getting together again and again, because he knew so many people and he had such wonderful stories, some of them scurrilous, maybe more than a few. And I always loved to listen to him. That was one of the things I think that many people did. They loved to listen to Mike because he could tell you an entertaining story at the drop of a hat. Well, that's how we ended up working on the guest of honor speeches. We were both interested in the history, but really the fun that I enjoyed was with him at conventions. When he was my guest at a Tropicon back in the 80s, we did a roast. And maybe the thing that I was most pleased with all of that, and he seemed to be having a good time as well, was when I brought back an old working buddy of his that he really never expected to meet again, because this guy brought back some strange memories. It was Herschel Gordon Lewis, the filmmaker who is most famous for chicken skin and horror films. And Mike had not worked for him on any of these famous horror movies. Mike had worked for him on some, let's say, off-color movies where he had done a script of maybe 4 pages long. Mike would never reveal which of these scripts he wrote. He says he told me once when I was drunk, because I wouldn't remember. That's what he said. And I couldn't tell you for the life of me what that movie was that he told me he worked on. However, Mike was always full of fun and teasing and wonderful stories. And I'm going to miss him for a long time. And that's it from me.
We have Sue and Eric. I see Eric's light flashing, but I don't hear him. Still can't hear you, Eric. I think you're trying to talk. For the group as a whole, any other memories of Mike you want to share? Any responses to some of what you heard?
I just want to say to Joe that Mike told me that he had written a lot of porno film scripts over the years, not just 1 or 2, but he never told me which ones they were either.
Well, this is Laura. I haven't heard the name Herschel Lewis in many years, but I remember a lot of my father's stories about Herschel Lewis, who could make an entire movie, if you want to call it that, in 3 days. Yeah. I remember a lot of my father's scurrilous stories. I don't repeat them because they're scurrilous, and I have no proof that these things actually happened. I just, most of all, I really need to express my shock and dismay that Shahid ever followed my father's fashion advice. What were you thinking?
I was naive and new. Really. And you know how he and Bob Silverberg always used to, kind of go at each other. So I just got stuck right in the middle. It was a great relationship. I mean, like, you're all great friends. But I just remember that because, I had not known Bob. And then he goes, what the heck are you doing? Exactly what you just said, depending on my profession advice.
I'd like to add a story about Mike's generosity.
Is there time for a story?
Or not?
Can't hear anything, so.
I think we hear you, Sue.
I hear you, Sue.
I'm not sure this is coming through.
I can hear you.
I just remember exactly when I met Mike. After, it was a few years ago, probably back in the early 1980s. Mike loved his back rubs and was always willing to receive them from any ladies that were willing to spend a bit of time giving them to him. The only time that I really remember Mike being upset with me was when we had his retirement at Worldcon in 2000. At Worldcons, Mike always invited several writer friends to join him in the Cincinnati Fantasy Group Suite Party Hotel. They were always welcome, and we really enjoyed visiting them. Mike was the fan guest of honor at RiverCon 6 in 1981, guest of honor at RiverCon 15 in 1990, and Toastmaster at RiverCon 25 in 2000. Because all knew of Mike's love of horse racing, for presentation at the last RiverCon in 2000, we made Mike a plaque read, Mike Resnick, RiverCon's only Triple Crown winner, fan of honor, guest of honor, and Toastmaster. That really tickled Mike, and the crowd loved it. And there are so many other memories that I have of Mike and his family, but there are so many others who'd like to speak. We all miss you, Mike. I'm done.
Eric keeps trying to talk to us, but he says on the chat that his audio keeps breaking up. While Eric keeps driving with the audio, maybe now would be a chance for our recorded message from Cat Rambo. Alan, is that ready?
One of my fondest memories of the Spokane Worldcon was getting the chance to sit with Mike and talk for a good 45 minutes, I don't know, an hour, about our industry and new writers and how to help them. It was a lovely meeting that I will always treasure. And as a result of it, Mike and I wrote a story together, The Mermaid Club, where we both tweaked each other a little. We had a lot of fun, and it was just one of the best experiences. I will miss him, and I know that fantasy and science fiction will as well.
I think we still can't quite get Eric. Afitha has culled some quotes from the Discord chat. I'd like to share some of this that the community want to be able to hear from them as well. Paula LL, I still remember where I met Carol and Mike backstage at the TorCon 2 Masquerade. 3 a.m. was the time that Mike was to be found in the hotel lobby at Worldcons talking about racing and Broadway show tunes, often with Josepha Sherman. And there was Mike at parties playing games such as, here's the first line or last line of a story, and if you didn't get it right, he was liable to thunk you on the head. Arg. There's one from the community. I'm fortunate that I never got thunked on the head from Mike. Has anybody else been thunked by Mike?
No.
No, that actually sounds very, very scurrilous. I loved his scurrilous stories, Laura. So perhaps when we meet next time, you can tell me some of them. Sorry to interrupt with that.
It's not an interruption. We're sharing at this point, so happy to hear it.
But what I found also fascinating, he always liked, I think, to present this gruff image, but he really was a teddy bear inside. I mean, you know, when you really got to know him, he really had a kind heart and really, you know, had great empathy for other people. Yeah.
I'd like to add something. We always, the writer children, would always point out that he was like a curmudgeon wrapped up in a teddy bear. He really had his gruffness, like Shahid said, kind of hid his big heart. And he was a larger than life character, like a lot of his characters in his books. He himself was like Mr. Personality. Early on, when we were getting to know each other, I started nicknaming the Story Man, because even if he wasn't writing, he was always telling stories. It literally was as innate to him as he breathed. It was just, you were never unentertained with Mike. He always had something that you didn't know. He was just full of stories. I'm positioned in front of all his books here, which start on this shelf, and you can't see them all because they go down to the 4th shelf at the bottom here, and that's not including the books he edited. This is just all his fiction. So yeah, amount of stories.
I agree with Leslie.
I'd like to add something too to what Shahid said. under that gruff exterior of Mike's genuine empathy and kindness. In 2002, I lost my then husband, Charles Sheffield, to cancer. And there was nobody in all of science fiction who was kinder to me than Mike. At subsequent conventions, he would sit with me. We would sit alone somewhere in a corner and he would listen to me and he would talk to me. And it was an entirely different Mike than the kind of joking, gruff, light Mike that you saw a lot of the time. But it was there, and he was a very, very kind person.
Yeah, I concur with all of that. I think Mike's sensitivity is something that a lot of people don't necessarily know about him, because he was an extremely sensitive guy, and it reflected, I think, in a lot of his storytelling. The gruff exterior, the rascal's twinkle, that was all part of who he was. But you could get him to a certain place where he was incredibly human, and that always touched me a great deal. Again, as somebody who invested so much of his time in new people coming up, that touched me. Again, it helped make him even larger than he was from his many publications. You know, he had his career reputation, but then you got to know who Mike was as Mike the guy, Mike the person. And I completely agree with Nancy's sentiments, and I completely agree with Leslie and Shahid.
I agree. Mike was always trying to bring people closer together, to get them to contribute to something, to get them to work on something. If he thought you were trying to do something, he was always trying to help you get there. And he used to tell wonderful stories, not just about the scurrilous ones with the fans, as you said, but of some of the people, especially some of the old timers that he met early on in his entry into science fiction fandom. You could immediately see his loving stories about Doc Smith and some of the other old timers. So he had certainly had that outgoing facade. Wasn't a facade, that was really him. And he also had that inner part of him that was, I thought, very, very sincere and very, very helpful and fanish. Yes.
And as someone had mentioned that he, always had these larger than life characters in a lot of his stories. And to some extent, and he was larger than life himself. But to me, always, in his stories, the stories that truly represented Mike were stories I Have Touched the Sky, which is such a sensitive story about different perspectives and things like that. And that's really what made him such a great writer, was his ability to look at different perspectives and empathize with all sorts of different people and points of view.
He was also not afraid to take on controversy. The Karen Young stories were controversial. There were a lot of people who did not understand what he was trying to do. You had to read the entire sequence to know that how deeply felt he was putting forth that you cannot recapture the past, and you should not try. But people read individual stories and they thought he was doing just the opposite. I too thought, For I Have Touched the Sky is one of the 2 science fiction stories that have ever made me cry. And Kamari in that story is very much, even though she's only 8 years old or 10 years old, a proto-feminist. She is trying hard to improve herself, to learn to read, to do things that are forbidden in that culture to women and girls. And she eventually changes even Kariba, the protagonist, slightly. And he changes more and more as the sequel goes on. And Seven Views of Auditorium Gorge is also a controversial story to a lot of people, because it seems to say that humanity began in violence, will end in violence, and may begin over again in violence. And a lot of people would rather not hear that message. But if you look at the history that we have all the way back to when we were proto-humans, there it is. And he did not flinch away from those kinds of truths. And that too I think is what made him a really good writer. For his best work, he had it all out there and he wasn't afraid to take it on.
I also think Mike understood human nature at a very implicit level. We're talking about stories. Well, one of the ones that comes to mind is Bully, his famous story about Teddy Roosevelt. It's an alternate history. That story is so rich with what I consider to be an understanding of how people actually work and how people actually behave versus how we either wish people would behave or we imagine them to behave. It was deeply rooted in who we really are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And to me, that was also Mike. You know, Mike, he knew everything about what made us tick as human beings, the good parts and the bad parts, and he wove that into his fiction in a delightful fashion.
Something that I found was really interesting about Mike, because my major relationship with him has been because of Writers of the Future. And when he told me about Galaxy's Edge, he was all excited about it because he really was all about his writers' children, you know, his kids. He was always trying to be able to help nourish and to nurture them for a future in science fiction. And he was so happy when it became the editor of this, that he'd be able to provide that. So he would call me and talk about it. And it was interesting about talking to him too, because I never talked to him during the day. It was always late at night. He said, yeah, daytime I sleep then because all the people trying to sell me stuff, they can't reach me. So I'm there at nighttime, so it's easy to talk to him. So we had plenty of conversations late at night, early in the morning, like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, talking about, you know, how proud he was, excited he was with when he found out how many of the different writers that he had helped vote on are actually now the ones that he's publishing, and just seeing the future of science fiction moving forward. He was for him, like he said in that little video clip I put, was very happy about paying forward. And that's what he really felt he was doing. And that's, at least in my conversations, something he was very, very, very proud about being able to do.
This is Laura. Dad and I didn't really talk that much about writing or the business. We talked about family stuff, but there was an occasion on this topic about 15 years ago, something like that, when I was helping a writer who needed help, who had come to me asking me for kind of a leg up. And it turned out I helped the wrong person. This writer behaved very, very badly, cost me a lot of money, cost me a lot of embarrassment, backstabbed me. And I told my dad about it, and I was very upset at the time. And I remember him saying to me, well, what happened to you is terrible, and you know that person should rot in hell, but you must never let this get you to stop helping other writers. You must help the next writer behind you who comes along and asks for your help. You can't let this change that. And I still remember that, and I carried that with me.
That is so your dad.
I'm sorry, I think people can hear this cat. I'm going to put on my mute again.
I'd like to introduce another comment from the community, from Ben Yawo from Chicon 8. He will be missed as an author editor, but most of all for me as an exemplar of what our fanish community is about. I knew him for almost a half century, and he's part of why I'm still here that half century later. Because he was a fan as much as he was anything else. All right, I'm told you couldn't hear me. Did that come through?
Martin, I really can't hear you.
Cannot hear me?
No.
Yeah, you're really soft for some reason.
Okay, good. It's not just me.
And now I don't hear anything at all, Martin.
Nothing.
I think he might be offline.
No, he's not muted, but we're not hearing you at all.
My sound should be good.
It is better now.
Better?
I think so.
I can
Be better.
barely hear you.
Now, let me get paid.
No,
Nothing.
barely.
It's almost like your mic is disconnected and we're picking you up from the laptop if you're using a laptop.
I've been using the laptop and nothing has changed in the middle here, so I'm not sure what would have happened there, but welcome to the wonderful world of technology. Let me try my mic settings here. Meanwhile, if anybody else has anything to say while I try to fiddle with this, please go ahead.
I would like to share another story. One thing with Mike that I loved is similar
So Martin,
to.
if you could check your sound settings and make sure the mic is on auto gain.
It is.
Is anyone there?
I'm seeing you now, Leslie.
Okay. So one thing I was just going to share is my pup has hopped up on my lap here. And like a lot of stories echoed earlier, when I went to get my dog, Mike was like, "Oh, that's not a dog. It's not a collie," you know. And but when he saw pictures of her, he would actually be talking to me late at night. We would often talk sort of around midnight nearly every night. And he'd be like, "I haven't got my obligatory Bindi photo," you know, just randomly every few days. And, you know, so despite him, that's not a dog, you know, you could tell he was just a dog lover all over. And I just loved that despite the fact that, you know, he had his own world, he was always busy writing, he would sort of come in and chat, you know, before he'd start his work night. He'd always make the effort to sort of remember elements of your life and always ask you about how you're going. Whenever I was sick, he always would ask how I was going. And then the second question was, when are you starting to write again? So, you know, that's also very typical Mike. So.
All right, I think I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yay!
Much better. Much better, sir.
Zoom technology stuff that I'll be glad to talk to sometime when it's not taking up time in the memorial. But Zoom decided to knock me down to almost nothing. But that brings us right about to the point in our schedule where I hope you all have got a glass to raise.
Yep.
I would like to offer a toast in memorial, Michael Diamond Resnick, writer, editor, mentor, fan, explorer, raconteur, handicapper, fencer, humorist, friend, father, husband. He paid it forward. May we do the same. Salute to Mike.
Salute to Mike.
Cheers.
Now, there's a part of Leslie's story that she didn't tell, because Mike did not just teach her to be a writer. He taught her to be an editor. She was a great assistant to him in the last years of Galaxy's Edge. And now, of course, she is carrying the torch as editor of Galaxy's Edge. And so I would like to turn the closing of the ceremony over to Leslie to express our thanks and wish you all well. Leslie.
Hello. Yeah, I have to say, I've been listening to this and loving the entire experience. I have to admit, I cried during the montage. I've seen all the wonderful videos, the photos, but the video, it just choked me up. I just would like to, especially, of all things, someone just knocks then. Great timing, world, right? So, Bindi, settle. This is the worst timing. Anyway, I apologize for that. So, of all things, I would like to point out that when Mike introduced me to this world, I never realized that I would be getting a family. I never knew that I would have a family away from home of people that 10 years ago I'd never even met. And now they've become literally as close to me as my blood. I've never experienced that sort of community before. Even you have school friends, you have friends that you gather through your life, but the family that I have here, Mike created for me. He literally gave me a family. And I think all of us can say here that Mike really did not only help new writers. I can hear someone.
Someone needs to mute their mic.
So not only did he create a family, but I think that he also felt like this field was his family. One of the biggest things in all my memories of Mike was about how much he loved this field. He was a fan as well as a writer. He was never just the editor, never just the writer. He was a fan, and he was his writer's biggest #1 fan. He never once, never once was in our corner. I think that when we had, our rough moments or hard times, he was always 100% in your corner, even if he didn't always 100% agree with what you were doing. And I think that's a testament about Mike, his talent, which is displayed literally in the background.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, Eric, let's switch to Eric. We can always come back to me after. Yes, we can hear you, Eric. Are you still there? We had one line from Eric.
We heard you briefly, Eric. Come on back.
We did. Come back.
Can you? Because I don't get it.
Eric gets the award for best effort tonight. He is trying. Are you there? Maybe I'll speak until Eric comes back. All right, I would like to especially thank the NASFiC people for organizing this wonderful memorial. Oh, I think I heard him for a second. I would like to thank Anne Gray, Hafitha Akwe. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Hafitha Akwe and Rob Stewart, Matt Arnold, Alan Bond, and the technical support team of NASFiC. I would also like to thank Shahid Mahmood and John Goodwin for helping Martin, who really was sending millions of emails putting this together. Martin Shoemaker definitely worked so much behind the scenes. I saw so from Martin and Hafitha, they both worked tirelessly. So I'd like to thank them especially, and also our presenters. I just want to check is Eric there? So I'm trying to work out if I should do a closing or we wait for Eric.
We are just about at the end of our time.
That's what I was wondering.
We got about a minute.
Okay, so I'll just do the closing then. So I would like to just say on behalf of Carol and Laura and myself, and especially all the loved ones of Mike who have been here with him through the end. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful family for Mike. Mike really did see you all as family. And I know that somewhere he would love to thank everyone. He didn't get to say goodbye to everyone, but I know he would love to thank everyone for being a part of his life. There will be links to the GoFundMe to help support Carol after, you know, all that's said and done. Carol Resnick was the love of his life, and every story nearly had Carol in it. Whether she was, you know, like the focus of the story, but every book was dedicated to her. She was his life. And the second most important thing to him was Laura. I heard probably more than a broken record how many times he wanted to collaborate with her. So I know he is the most happiest that Laura is finishing his book. I would just love to thank the rest of the community so very much for being here with us tonight. And thank you very much for loving Mike's words. We'll have new books to read coming out from here soon, and I'm sure his book with Laura will be wonderful. Thank you very much for tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
You got to accentuate the positive feeling, minus the negative. Latch on to the affirmative. Don't mess with Mr. In Between. You got to spread joy up to the maximum. Bring gloom down to the minimum. Have faith or pandemonium, liable to walk upon the scene.
To illustrate his last remark, Jonah in the whale, Noah in the ark. What did they do just when everything looked so dark?
Man, they said we better accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. Latch on to the affirmative. Don't mess with Mr. In Between. No, do not mess with Mr. In Between. Do you hear me?
Oh, listen to me, chillin' Anna. You will hear about the eliminating of the negative and an accent on a positive.
Gather round me, children, if you're willing, and sit tight while I start reviewing the attitude of doing right.
You gotta accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. Latch on to the affirmative. Don't mess with Mr. In Between.
You got to spread joy
Up to the maximum.
Bring gloom
Down
to the minimum.
Then
Otherwise, pandemonium, liable to walk upon the scene.
To illustrate,
Well, illustrate.
my last remark,
You got the floor.
Jonah
in the whale, Noah
in the ark. What did they say?
What did they say?
Say when everything looked so dark. Man, they said we better accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. Latch on to the affirmative. Don't mess with Mr. In Between. No, don't mess with Mr. In Between. Holding hands at midnight, neath the starry sky. Nice work if you can get it, and you can get it if you try. Strolling with the one voice, sighing sigh after sigh. Holding hands at midnight, neath a starry sky. That's work if you can get it, then you can get it if you try. Strolling with the one boy, side up to side, to each side of the other. That's good work if you try. Just imagine someone waiting at the cottage door, where two hearts to come on, who could ask for anything more? Loving one who loves you and then taking that vow.
Please welcome Riders of the Future Judge Mike Resnick and Ms. Jane Pettyjohn.
Stop the crawl for just a minute. Why should Eric be the only one to ad-lib? It's a given in this and every other field that when you've had a successful career, you pay back. But in this field, it's almost impossible because by the time you've been a remarkable success, everybody who helped you is either rich or dead or both. So you pay forward. And the many judges and workshoppers who run and work the contest do much the same thing. And it's reached down into the actual field itself. My own example is that I have been editing a science fiction magazine for the past 6 years. I don't know who I buy from until after the contracts go out and I hear from them, but it turns out that more than half the stories I've bought have been from Writers of the Future graduates.
Let me see the world with clouds. Take me to the world. Out where I can push through crowds. Take me to the world. A world that smiles with streets instead of aisles. Where I can walk for miles with you. Take me to the world that's real. Show me how it's done. Teach me how to laugh, to feel. Move me to the sun. Just hold.
The recording has stopped.
Thank you, everyone. That was wonderful.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. I'm so sorry my dog decided to bark at the UPS truck right at the last minute. And then since then, she's been sitting at my feet.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate everybody's work on this, and my dad really, really would appreciate it. I know my mom does too. She's at her new place tonight. I'm sure she'll talk to you later.
Yeah.
I'm glad I was able to help.
Thank you. So,
Thank you, everybody,
goodbye,
for letting me be part.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay.